Welcome to JustB2B Leaders, a podcast where we are going to interview leaders from B2B companies that they are willing to generate a better business, more predictable and scalable through the transformation of their organizations. So welcome to this podcast today with Frank Cespedes. Frank, who is Frank Cespedes?
Frank Cespedes is me. I'm a professor at Harvard Business School. I've known Oscar for a number of years, admire the work he's done, and it's a pleasure to be with you on JustB2B.
Fantastic. So I hope you enjoyed this session. Today we are going to talk with Frank about the role of the sales manager. So Frank, tell me then, if you were a CEO and now you are considering to hire a new sales manager, what are the characteristics that makes a very good sales manager?
Yeah, it's a very good and timely question. It's a question that, as someone who serves on boards, works with lots of companies around the world, it's a question a CEO faces not just once, but usually a couple of times in their careers. I'm going to talk about this at a couple of different levels, Oscar. The first comment I want to make is that sales is very, very context specific, much more so than probably any other function in business. And what I mean by that is selling software is different than selling capital goods, is different than selling professional services. So it depends on what you sell, and it also depends on to whom you sell and where. As you know, selling in Europe is different than selling in North America or Asia, etc. So the first responsibility of the CEO making that decision, and it's their responsibility, is to understand their company, their context, their strategy, because that is ultimately where the sales manager's performance is. There's no such thing as a great sales manager in the abstract. There's only a sales manager who can work in my company with my products at my prices. CEO has to understand that.
So you are saying that to hire a good sales manager, first you need to be a good CEO.
And that's exactly right. And you need to have a strategy and know what it implies.
Absolutely.
For sales.
Let's assume that they have a good definition of the strategy, right? Yeah. So what's next somehow?
Well, the next thing, and here I'm going to start with the negative, then I'll get to the qualities. But the single biggest complaint that I have heard from CEOs about their sales leaders throughout my career, this has been true for 30 years, the CEO often complains, we hired Charlie or Charlotte as our new sales manager. They were one of our best salespeople. They continue to be a good salesperson, but they don't know how to manage, all right? And they don't understand that now as a manager, we expect them to execute the strategy, not just chase any business anywhere. So that's the next thing. And again, I think it's a dual responsibility. On the one hand, you've got to educate the new sales manager about the strategy and make it very clear that being a manager is different than being a great salesperson, right? It helps, but it's not the same thing. And then I think there's a responsibility on the candidate side. They either do or don't want to be managers. Many salespeople do not want to be managers. They're very happy just selling. So you've got to look for that. Then when it comes to the qualities, I think there are fundamental leadership qualities in most leadership positions. By definition, a leader is somebody who has to get things done through others. So either we have somebody who understands that and is good at it or doesn't. B, their second major responsibility is to allocate resources appropriately. And in this case of a sales manager, that's sales resources. Do they know how to do that? Are they up to date with where the impact is and is not? And then the third issue is it's always about people, people skills. And that includes performance management and performance review skills, and we may want to talk about this later, but in my experience, that is the most underutilized lever in sales for affecting behavior. And that's the manager's job, is to understand how to develop their own people.
So what are the common mistakes you have seen that general managers, CEOs, they recognize they made when hiring a sales manager?
By far,
probably it's the opposite of what you said,
yeah,
right? But any other thing that?
Oh no, but I know exactly what the most common mistake is. I see it all the time, and I would be very, very surprised if our listeners haven't had this experience. The most common situation is this: we hired so and so, who we know was a great salesperson, in fact, maybe even a great sales manager at this other company, in fact, a company in our industry, and somehow when they got to our company, they weren't as good or they weren't good at all. Now, that's a very, very common experience. And whenever I hear that, what I always say is, let's step back. Now, why does that happen? It's not as though that person we hired suddenly got stupid, right? It's not as though they suddenly lost their individual capabilities. I go back to the very first thing I said. Sales is context specific. Being a good sales manager in your company with your strategy is different than being a good sales manager in my company with my strategy. That's part of the CEO's responsibility, is to make clear what the differences are and then judge whether this person understands, appreciates those differences, and can rebuild their capabilities in our context. But that's the most common mistake. We hired so-and-so, they're great, they'll definitely be great where we are, leave them alone. No, they've got to be socialized into your company.
And do you believe that with the existing context, which is everything is changing so fast at any level, right? Geopolitical level, social level, technological level, how this affects to the sales management position? How do you believe that this affects to sales managers?
Well, I mean, first I want to step back with that, Oscar. I get asked this question about change all the time, and a couple of things. There's always been change in business, all right? Business is about change. So it's not as though there was 100 years of stasis and then suddenly change. That said, there is research that supports the common perception that while there's always been change, the change now is more rapid for lots of reasons we all know: technology, regulations, macroeconomic issues, etc. But I think that's not a difference in quality, it's just a difference in the pace. Now, how do you deal with that? The first thing, and this is a mindset issue, and once I say this, it will sound so obvious. Many of our listeners are going to say, wow, that guy teaches at Harvard, duh. But all I can tell you is that there are many managers, in fact, a number of CEOs, very well educated, who for some reason don't get this. It is not the responsibility of the market to understand and be nice to your company and your strategy. The market will do what the market will do for lots of reasons that are outside of your control.
They don't get it.
They don't get it, right.
They don't get it.
It's your responsibility to adapt.
We have a great product, but they don't get it.
So, I mean, that's number one, is mindset. Number two, and this I think is getting back to your earlier question, something you do quite rightly look for in a sales leader. Change is never easy in sales and marketing. Sales and marketing people generally talk a really good game about change. They're hip, they dress, they always say, oh, change. But they are among the more change-resistant people in companies, not because of their genetic structure, their DNA, but because of the central role of sales, especially in B2B companies. So many other resource allocation decisions in a B2B company, hiring, capacity, do we or don't we build a plant, operations. So many of those other decisions depend on sales forecasts and the ability of the sales force to make the forecast. As a result, what the other functions want from sales is, quote, predictable revenue. In other words, make your numbers because I'm making decisions based on the numbers. The metrics in marketing and especially sales tend to reinforce that. They're short term. So as a result, when you're in sales, even when you know the change may be better, you're still thinking 30 days ahead, 3 months ahead.
Yeah.
That's how companies get
how you balance
that's right.
what you should do with what at the end of the day you have to do
that's right.
to deliver the number, right?
Yeah. And then the last thing I would say about change, and this is linked to why sales is so important, you never bet the company. I think exactly because the pace of change is now faster and more complex, it is very important in sales to learn how to do tests and experiments. And tests and experiments in business are not the same as a clinical trial for a drug. They're not the same as what we academics do when we write a statistically significant paper. When you're doing a test in business, think of it this way. You're in a boat, full sail on the ocean. You got to rebuild the boat while it's in full sail, and you don't control the weather. So that's different than a clinical trial. And that's what I think good sales leaders learn to do. They learn how to say, let's do it here. And what we learn from that, we can then scale or not scale. And that takes judgment. That AI is not going to replace that. That takes human judgment.
And talking about AI, how do you feel about that? It's we are at the end of the hype, or
I think we're right at the peak of the hype, but there will be a reaction. It's it's interesting you asked me about that. I just finished writing an article about it. It'll be published in about 2 months. I would say a couple of things. One is right now, AI, artificial intelligence, is a phrase that, it means lots of different things. But I think the core value proposition for AI is that the AI tools can do certain tasks almost as good as people or better than people. And because they can do those tasks, it frees up people to do tasks that they do especially well, that the technology can't. And in sales, I always look at 2 areas where I think AI is making a difference. One is it frees up time for salespeople and sales managers to do things that they couldn't otherwise get to. What AI is clearly very good at is content marketing, personalizing the email, all that other stuff that allows salespeople to spend more time with customers. And that's a very, very big deal, because if you can increase sales utilization 5%, 10%, 20%, not only is that a big productivity increase, but markets and segments that were not economically feasible do become feasible with better sales utilization. In other words, it also increases your addressable market. I think you're going to see AI do a lot of work there. And then the other thing is lead generation and lead qualification. I'm on the board of a company that sells an AI tool for lead generation, lead qualification. And it's not perfect. It gets better and better. It's not perfect, but I can tell you 80% of the time, it's better at the folk wisdom currently in place in the sales force, because the folk wisdom is driven more by the sales compensation system than market reality. The AI tool is about the market reality. Now, having said that, I think there are 2 warnings I would give, especially to sales managers, about AI. The first one is nobody has repealed the technology law of garbage in, garbage out. All right? The AI is all about the data. The company I said I'm on the board on,
Right.
our clients spend so much more money on cleaning up their data systems than they do buying our tools. And in sales, the most common data is data from the CRM system. Notoriously noisy data. Not because of the software is fine, but because of the human inputs.
Claro.
You say that a lead is somebody who actually has a budget. I say a lead is anybody I bumped into in Harvard Square. All the CRM system does is aggregate that. You got to clean it up. And the second thing, and this is something I predict will get more and more attention and start the hype curve coming down before it goes back up. AI is basically machine learning algorithms. And this gets us back to the data. What the machine learning algorithm does, it's really good at finding patterns in the data. And it keeps doubling down on the patterns. But over time, that data becomes more and more obsolete. But the machine learning algorithm keeps doubling down. For example, the board of the company I'm on, almost all of our clients immediately get a big bump in sales productivity when they buy our tool. So they love it. But then there's steeply declining returns. Again, not because of the tool, but because of the data. And here's the issue that you're going to hear more and more about. In traditional computer systems, when you want to delete data, it's fairly straightforward. That's not true in machine learning. I read last month a very good Microsoft report about that, and I thought the Microsoft researchers phrased it well. They said trying to delete data from a machine learning algorithm is like trying to extract the ingredients of an already baked cake. It's expensive and time-consuming, but it's necessary. But you're going to hear more and more about that. So that's my speech about AI.
And somehow, do you believe that don't you believe that all this technology will make human beings too similar? And then other soft skills will become more relevant. The other day I was taking a cab. I was in the middle of somewhere because I'm traveling a lot. I was taking a cab, and the taxi driver was using the same apps I use every day. And I was thinking, oh my God, technology will make us a commodity as a human being, right? Somehow. Because at the end of the day, it's like when automotive start using the same software, the same machines, the same suppliers. It's at the end of the day, it could be a difference between a very expensive premium car and one which is more mainstream, right? But how don't you think that we are going to get into an age where people and human beings and soft skills will be again very relevant in relationships?
Oh, no, I agree with that last, what you're saying is the outcome, the implication, but I would frame it a little bit differently because I think here AI is just a continuation of what you and I have seen throughout our careers. Think about e-commerce, think about digital technologies in general. More and more of the transactional aspects of sales are done that way. So this is part of a long-term trend where what you're calling the softer skills, the relationship building and relationship management skills are important. And they become more important over time.
Yeah.
The second thing, but that doesn't mean sales is obsolete or people just become robots. It says these skills are more important. The other thing I would say is this is part of what you should expect in business. The way I like to phrase this may at first sound glib, but I think people get the point. In business, you don't compete with the dead. You don't compete with companies that have gone out of business. They are, as we say, history. They're gone, right? You only compete with the survivors. Now, what does it take to survive in a competitive industry? If you have a monopoly, it's a different story. But in a competitive industry, if you're going to survive, you do have to adopt best practices. AI. AI will soon be a cost of doing business, all right? Not necessarily a differentiator, but you've got to get better and better.
Yeah.
But that's always been the case.
Yeah, raising the bar.
The bar is
Raising the bar.
always raising. That's exactly right. Sales right now, especially B2B sales, just happens to be Exhibit A for that. What a good B2B salesperson needs to know by the year 2024 is so much more than 20 years ago. So they're better, but they're also not doing things that 20 years ago we thought were cutting edge. Now, either A, they're table stakes, or we let the machine do it. But that's the glory of capitalism. That's why it creates value.
That's very good. The glory of capitalism.
Yeah. Well, I do teach at a business school.
Of course, yeah. So last question. What if you have to, if we try to finish in a very positive way, and we have some sales manager listening to us, what are the opportunities of the position? What do you think are the we could talk about threats as well, but I think it's interesting that at least to finish with the opportunities, right?
Yeah, no, I think the opportunities are enormous, and precisely because of the changes that are going on. And I think this is what brings together the two groups we've been talking about, the CEO, the sales manager. The reality in many, many B2B businesses is that sales was essentially managed as a kind of silo, all right? We expect them to meet their numbers every quarter, but just focus on sales. I've been worked with companies, especially tech companies, where sales is literally invited out of the room when we talk about product or price, because we don't want them offering discounts. One thing that technology is doing is linking these things more and more. So now, if you're a sales manager, there's a more direct link with strategy, with the C-suite, etc. That's an opportunity. But it does come with new skills. For example, if you look at all the data that's now being gathered by data science groups in companies, most of those groups do not report to the chief revenue officer. They report up through the finance function. And as you've probably discovered in your career, Oscar, finance people are very annoying. Once they get data, they start to ask questions. And this is my single biggest recommendation to the sales managers I meet that are less than 45 years old. If you want to move up in your organization, you better make sure that you have financial literacy. And by financial literacy, I don't just mean what most sales managers are good at. Let me show you about top line. I mean return on invested capital. How are we allocating resources to increase enterprise value?
EBITDA, contribution.
EBITDA, exactly. That's the language in which leadership arguments take place. The good news is sales is now being invited into those discussions in a way they weren't. But once you're invited in, you better know how to speak the language. So that's the opportunity.
Last question.
Yeah.
I told you that the last was the last
Next
question. Last question. What is your experience? How common is that the previous position of a CEO, it's a sales leader? At least for B2B companies. For B2C companies, my experience is that many CEOs, they come from marketing.
Yeah.
Right? Because marketing is very, very important in B2C. But what is your experience in B2B?
Well, it's not only my experience, but research. You know, the latest book I wrote, the last chapter is about this. There's very, very good research done by a former colleague of mine here at Harvard Business School. And what she did was look at the composition of the C-suite in the Global 1000 over the last 25 years. And what she found is that on average, the number of executives reporting to the CEO in those companies has doubled, twice as many. But then if you step back and ask yourself, who are these people? What were they doing before they became senior executives? The reality is that relatively few of those additions are general managers in the sense in which we use that phrase here at Harvard Business School. By a general manager, we mean somebody who's running a line of business or somebody with P&L responsibility. Most of them are specialists, the new additions, you know, the CIO, the CMO, the head of data, etc. And the reality is that the number of people who have made it to CEO in both B2B and B2C companies, the number of people who have made it to CEO having spent the majority of their career in sales is less than it's ever been.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why?
In fact, if you look 25 years ago, it was about, in the United States, it was about 25% of CEOs. Now, as recently as 5 years ago, if you looked at the Fortune 500, at one point there was only one CEO of a US Fortune 500 company who had spent the majority of his career in sales. That was Chuck Robbins of Cisco. Who are those people now? Backgrounds in technology, engineering, tech, finance. Finance has gone from here to there. But also, I think there's got to be something on the supply side. When sales is treated as a kind of silo, you don't get that larger
big picture.
And that's become more important.
Yeah.
So again, that's why I think the opportunity is there with sales, but you've got to be increasingly a leader, not only the guy or gal who delivers the numbers every quarter. That does remain, but that's sort of table stakes.
So your advice to those sales managers, sales leaders that they want to start their path to the C-suite and to the CEO position is that they really have to understand the big picture. They really have to understand finance, technology.
I think financial literacy is
very important.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I also think, and this is why is sales invited into those discussions? We live in an omni-channel buying world, right? Especially in B2B. Companies, customers now touch companies not only through sales, but through websites, influencers, buying forums, etc. Sales itself in most B2B companies is becoming a more cross-functional activity. In other words, the rep may still own the relationship, but in order to do value delivery, they've got to go back into their company and deal with production, fulfillment, whatever. The good ones learn to do that and they learn about the business. The bad ones don't. So, that's part of what sales managers are doing is enabling that to happen.
So Frank, thank you very much, man.
My pleasure.
It was fantastic.
Thank you.
I'm sure that all these sales managers willing to be CEOs and all these CEOs willing to hire a great sales manager, they are going to listen very carefully your words. But one more thing. So I think everybody should remember this Sales Management That Works, written by Frank Cespedes. Do you recommend the book?
I recommend this book wholeheartedly. I do, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much
Oscar.
again. Thank you. Ciao. Thank you, guys. Thank you for joining.
Bye-bye.